August Landmesser, the only German who refused to salute Nazi style when meeting Hitler, and the ending. It was just a photograph, grainy, black and white, and nearly lost to time. A sea of people frozen in a single moment. Thousands of arms raised high in a perfect disciplined salute. The setting was Hamburg, 1936. A warship loomed in the background, christened before a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. Flags flapped in the wind, uniforms gleamed under the summer sun, and the Führer himself stood on the platform. It was a moment designed to project power, unity, and total allegiance. But hidden in plain sight, buried within the crowd, something didn't fit. One man, just one, stood motionless among the uniformity, his arms folded across his chest, his gaze forward but detached, almost tired. No salute, no smile, no fear, just stillness. At first, no one noticed. Why would they? In a country where conformity was survival, attention was dangerous currency. But the camera had captured him, unknowingly framing a quiet rebellion that wouldn't be understood for decades. Historians wouldn't know his name. Editors would crop the photo. The world would move on, but the man who did not raise his arm had already made his choice. Who was he? Why had he defied the crowd when silence was safer? The image, as haunting as it was powerful, gave no answers. Only questions. In a regime built on obedience and terror, one man's refusal to move became an act of unspoken defiance. No speeches, no banners, just a folded pair of arms against the rising tide of fanaticism. This is not the story of a soldier or a revolutionary. It's the story of an ordinary man, unknown, unnoticed, who once chose not to salute. A decision made not in front of microphones or on battlefields, but in the stillness of personal conviction. And that decision would echo across time, louder than any shout. He wasn't born a rebel. August Landmesser grew up like any other boy in post-World War I Germany, poor, hungry, and surrounded by a country searching for someone to blame. Like many young men desperate for direction, he joined the Nazi Party in 1931. Not because he believed in their hatred, but because the uniform promised work, stability, and belonging. At the time, no one could see the storm that was coming, and if they did, few dared to say it aloud. August was just trying to survive, but fate has a way of testing the quiet ones. Her name was Irma Eckler. She worked in an office near the shipyard where August was employed. She was sharp, thoughtful, and smiled like she saw right through the world. August fell in love fast, and for the first time, something mattered more than fitting in. There was only one problem. Irma was Jewish. By 1935, Hitler had passed the Nuremberg laws, criminalizing relationships between Jews and Aryans. Love itself had become a crime, but August didn't care. He left the party. He stayed with Irma. They walked the streets together, arm in arm, daring anyone to challenge their happiness. When friends warned him it was dangerous, August shrugged. "I don't salute people I don't believe in," he once said quietly to a co-worker, "especially not when they tell me who I'm allowed to love." They tried to get legally married, but the state refused. Their daughter Ingrid was born illegitimate in the eyes of the Reich. Still, they lived as a family, defiant in their normalcy. And then came that moment. June 13, 1936. The ship launch in Hamburg. The rows of workers lined up like chess pieces. Hitler on the platform, cameras flashing, and August, somewhere in that crowd, standing beside his co-workers, watching everyone else raise their arms. He didn't, because by then, he wasn't thinking about jobs or safety. He was thinking about Irma, about the little girl waiting for him at home, about what it meant to say yes when the world screamed no. The world would not remember his words, but the camera caught the silence. A single frame. One man. Arms folded. Love. Standing still. Pause for a moment and support the channel by liking and subscribing. Now, let's dive back into this amazing story. The photograph would disappear into archives, unseen for decades. But for August, the consequences of that silent act came swiftly. In 1937, less than a year after he defied the salute, he and Irma were arrested under the charge of dishonoring the race. The same hands that once welcomed him into the party now shoved him into a jail cell, as if love itself were treason. August was thrown into a labor camp. Irma, pregnant with their second child, was imprisoned separately. They were allowed to write letters, brief, censored, emotionless by necessity. He signed them simply, "Yours." She signed them, "With love, Irma." Their daughter Ingrid, just 2 years old, was taken away and placed in a state orphanage. Their unborn child would never know a day of freedom. Still, August didn't recant, didn't apologize. When the courts gave him a chance to deny the relationship and save himself, he refused. "I love her," he said. "We are a family." The judge looked at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. To love the wrong person had become an unforgivable sin. Irma was transferred from prison to a succession of Nazi holding facilities. Her letters stopped. The silence stretched like a dark corridor, with no end in sight. In 1942, she was sent to the Bernburg Euthanasia Center, one of the Reich's killing institutions used to exterminate those deemed undesirable. Officially, no death certificate was issued. Unofficially, she was murdered. August, now a ghost of the man who once stood with arms folded, was released from prison and immediately conscripted into a penal military battalion, a punishment unit where men were sent to die. He was assigned to a campaign in Croatia, given the most dangerous missions, the fewest supplies, and no expectation of return. He vanished in 1944. His body was never found. Only a letter remained, marked "missing in action." Their children were left to the mercy of a regime that had destroyed their parents. Ingrid, now orphaned twice, was raised by strangers. The youngest, never held by her mother or father, was adopted by a family who never told her the full story until decades later. And yet, despite all the silence, something survived. The image. One photograph, buried for years, emerged after the war like a whisper from the past. Historians looked closely. Journalists traced names, and in the middle of a sea of outstretched arms, they found him. August Landmesser, the man who loved too loudly in a time that demanded silence. For years, their story lay buried under the rubble of war, forgotten in the fog that follows great tragedy. The Nazi regime had erased their names from records, their love from law, and their lives from history. All that remained was silence, and a single photograph, collecting dust, in an archive. But history, like truth, has a way of resurfacing. It began with the photo. In the early 1990s, a German newspaper published an old image from 1936, a moment captured at the launch of the naval vessel Horst Wessel in Hamburg. The photo showed hundreds of workers, arms stretched in a rigid salute to Hitler. But just off-center, barely noticeable unless you really looked, stood a man with his arms crossed. He wasn't saluting. He wasn't smiling. He looked tired. Human. The image went viral before viral existed. Readers asked, who was that man? Some thought he was simply indifferent or unaware. But one woman looked at the image and said, "That's my father." Her name was Irene Eckler, daughter of August and Irma. She had spent years quietly researching her parents' story, collecting documents, letters, and testimonies. When the photo surfaced, She didn't just recognize her father's face. She recognized the weight behind that folded posture. She knew why he didn't raise his hand. With Irene's help, journalists and historians began piecing it together. The young man who joined the Nazi Party in hopes of employment, the forbidden love with Irma, the refusal to abandon her, the child born in defiance of the law, the arrest, the forced separation, the deaths, the silence. The image now had a name, August Landmesser. But more than a name, it had meaning. It became a symbol, not of loud rebellion or violent protest, but of quiet, human resistance. One man, in the heart of a regime that demanded absolute loyalty, had chosen to stand still, not because he was a hero, not because he planned it, but because he loved someone more than he feared the state. Today, the photo hangs in classrooms, museums, and memorials. His daughters told their story. His name is etched in books and lectures. The man who once vanished now stands tall in history. Because sometimes, the most powerful stance is refusing to raise your hand. Time moves on, but photographs do not. That single frame, August Landmesser in a sea of salutes, has outlived the regime it captured, the war it symbolized, and even the man himself. Yet in that still image, something stirs. A whisper of courage, a glimpse of defiance not born of anger or violence, but of love. For August, resistance wasn't a speech or a banner or a battle cry. It was a choice made in silence. To stay with Irma when the world called her unworthy. To protect his family when the law called it treason. To fold his arms when everyone else raised theirs. He didn't live to see the fall of the Nazis. He didn't see justice served or freedom restored. But his legacy didn't end with him. It lived on in his daughters. Survivors of love, outlawed. It lived on in that photo, tucked away until someone finally asked, "Who is the man who stood still?" In a world where it's easier to go along, to disappear into the crowd, to raise your hand because everyone else does. August Landmesser reminds us that doing nothing can sometimes mean everything. His story is not about grand gestures. It's about one man who dared to love, dared to stay, and dared, in the most dangerous time, to simply say no. And in doing so, he became eternal. This was just one of many incredible moments in history. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon so you never miss another one.